Konnichiwa! Welcome to my latest video book review on the book Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins by Annette Simmons. So you hear a lot about storytelling, especially in my line of business. Stories are remembered something like 21 times better, and there's a significant emotional experience that goes into stories that you just don't get from facts, figures, diagrams, anything else. Because stories, as Stephen King, the writer, said, are actually mind reading. I'm taking something that I have in my mind and I'm putting it into your mind through the art of telling the story, telling you what I saw, heard, said, did, tasted, felt, etc. Storytelling is really experience reconstructed. I'm taking an experience that I had or a friend of mine had or that I saw in a movie, and I want you to have the exact same experience. So this book is all about telling stories, thinking in story, finding stories, and perfecting the craft of storytelling. I've probably read 10 or 12 books on storytelling. I've taken 2 or 3 workshops on it. I think I'm like an okay storyteller. It depends on the story I'm telling. But this book is really helpful if you're interested in finding your stories, right? Thinking in story, the first section of this book is really, really helpful because it kind of teaches you to get out of the logical, factual, like quant mode, which I can be in a lot, numbers person, and into the kind of more flowy, emotional, less well-defined storytelling mode. There's a really great episode recently of the ABC show Fresh Off the Boat, where Evan, the youngest of the 3 kids, wants Grandma to tell him stories about her time back in China, and every time she starts to tell the story, he interrupts to go, well, how did that happen? Or how did these things make sense? Or wasn't this character like overseas at the time? All these facts that get in the way of the point of the story being for her to connect with her grandchildren, for his grandma to connect with his grandchildren. And throughout the episode, he has to learn to stop doing that. And eventually he just starts chewing gum while she's telling stories so he can't interrupt. That's a really great example of thinking in story. Storytelling is not logical. It's not linear. One of the really cool things about storytelling is that you can connect parts, right? If you see the movie 4 Rooms, Pulp Fiction, Bad Times at the El Royale, there's certain other ones, you can take 3 or 4 different story arcs and weave them together. They don't have to be a straight line from we started here and we ended up here. So this book's really good about that. And then I found the stuff on finding stories to tell really, really helpful. And the, practicing the craft was interesting as well, especially her stuff on giving feedback for stories. I found that very helpful because I think sometimes I give too harsh feedback to people, or I expect stories to be like really good, and at the end I'll be like, and then what happened? Which is rude, but funny. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. Now let's get into my 3 big takeaways. Number 1, there are 6 types of stories that you're going to want to tell. They are who I am stories, stories about who you are as a person, right? Here I'm wearing my Henzo Gracie hoodie. That's a little bit of a who I am story since I've been doing competitive mixed martial arts and fighting for about 10 years. Who you are stories let people know how you became who you are today. They ground your reality to theirs. They show the steps, experiences, and anecdotes that created who you are today. Why I'm here. These are important for, speaking. I do a lot of speaking engagements to talk about why I'm here, what my purpose is today. Number 3, teaching stories. Teaching stories are basically reintroductions of Aesop's fables, right? They're stories where the story might be about one thing, but the lesson is what's more important. Vision stories. Your vision for the future. As an entrepreneur, most of the people who are watching this, you have to have a vision for your clients, for your customers, and you have to explain that vision in a story. Value in action stories. I can tell you that I have integrity, I can tell you that I'm honest, but you're probably not going to believe me. But if I tell you a story about a time when I had a chance to be dishonest, like let's say I found someone's wallet and there was a bunch of cash in it, and I ended up, tracking the person down, getting in a cab and going to their house to return it, that tells you that I'm an honest person, if the story's true. I could just be lying. Right? That's the other thing about storytelling is you have to be able to create credibility. And I would have liked to have seen something that talked about credibility in this book. And the last type of story is a I know what you're thinking story. And so these are kind of to prompt or deal with objections people might have. I know what you're thinking. So maybe on a date you might tell someone a story about how, you're reliable or how you're a good cook if they're thinking, the last person they dated was unreliable or a bad cook. In a job interview, you might tell a story about how, you'd be the right person for the job because you have X quality. Stuff like that. So those are the 6 types of stories. I found that really helpful. I think you can see where those stories can kind of fit into your business and your life. Takeaway number 2, the 4 ways to find stories. I actually did a video about this recently. The 4 ways to find stories are movies or current events, things that happen to a mentor, friend, or coworker, a time you shined, and a time you blew it. Great ways to find stories. And the 3rd big takeaway that I got from this book was the difference between cultural awareness and story awareness. So this was really interesting. I never heard this concept explained anywhere before. Annette Simmons explained it in this book. Cultural awareness, she says, is learning the stories that a certain culture uses to interpret the big questions about life. Christianity's one example, folk stories are another example, the Greek god and goddesses are another example. Story awareness is recognizing within your own culture the stories that you tell and the different reactions that people have to them based on points of view and personal experiences. Anytime you tell a story, that person's experience is going to either propel them towards or away from the emotional experiences in that story. So story awareness helps you become a better communicator with people who don't think like you by thinking about the way that the stories you tell are interpreted through other people's point of view and experiences and culture. So thinking about that is really, really powerful, especially when you think about it in terms of things like the way the U.S. tried to bring democracy to Iraq, right? We were telling a story that to us made a lot of sense from our point of view. Why wouldn't you want democracy? Why wouldn't you want freedom? But in their culture, it didn't really make any sense because it didn't speak to the real problems and the real questions that they had to interpret on a day-to-day basis. So really fascinating stuff. Overall, I would give this book 4 out of 5 stars. I've probably read too many books on storytelling already to give any other book a 5-star review, but I do enjoy it. I think the story examples and the ways to find stories are worth hunting down if you're someone who communicates for a living, like a coach or a consultant. And I definitely think you'll be very, very well informed, and it will help you become a better storyteller. So check out Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins by Annette Simmons, and I will talk to you very soon.